The galaxy had long believed that Deathworlders, the humans, were strong but predictable. They were feared, yes, but not truly understood. The other species had fought them many times before, and they thought they knew their patterns, their codes, their rules. Humans played fair, they believed in lines drawn even in war. They respected treaties, they gave warnings, they followed laws that made them seem civilized. And because of that, the galactic powers grew comfortable. They studied humanity not to fear it, but to control it. That night, on the outer rim, every one of those assumptions began to die. The colony of Tesser's Reach sat on a cold world, small but rich with resources. To the alien coalition, it was an easy target, a place to make an example out of humanity. Hundreds of their warships surrounded the planet like a metal noose. The alien admirals were calm, almost amused, as their fleets came into position. They believed that when humans were trapped, they would send out diplomats. They believed humans would negotiate, maybe resist for a while before surrendering. They believed the outcome was already decided. But something happened that none of them expected. The colony went silent. Not the usual silence of power outages or panic, but a complete and controlled silence. No defense signals, no distress calls, no movement in orbit. The ships on the surface stayed cold. Communication towers dimmed their lights one by one until the entire planet looked dead. At first, the coalition commanders laughed. To them, this was proof that the humans had lost their nerve. To them, it was a surrender without words. But the more their sensors scanned, the stranger it became. This was not chaos. This was precision. Then came the message. 3 simple words broadcast on every channel, every frequency, every screen. A human voice, calm, low, steady, spoke across the stars. It begins. No threats, no explanation, no fear. Just those words. Across the bridge of the alien flagship, the officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some laughed nervously, others brushed it off as a bluff. But one of the older admirals, a creature with silvered plates on its head, went quiet. He had fought in the border wars against humans long ago. He remembered stories of battles that ended in silence. Silence was never good. The coalition fleet sent out scouting patrols to the surface to see why the humans weren't responding. Small ships entered the atmosphere, scanning the colony. What they saw confused them. Every building was powered down, every landing pad empty, every sensor offline. The colony didn't look like it was under siege. It looked like it had been waiting. The pilots reported no signs of civilians, no soldiers, no resistance. But something felt wrong. The ground scanners showed tunnels under the colony, tunnels that went deep, far deeper than their records showed. Before they could investigate further, the patrol signals disappeared. No warning, no explosions, just gone. The admirals assumed it was a malfunction at first, then an ambush. They sent more patrols. One by one, those patrols vanished too. Their last messages were filled with static and short, breathless bursts of fear. Something was moving beneath the surface, but nothing showed on the scanners. By now, the laughter on the alien flagship had stopped. The officers were leaning forward over their screens, trying to understand what was happening. They didn't know it yet, but the game had already changed. Far below the frozen soil of Tesser's Reach, in deep black tunnels carved into the bedrock, humans moved like shadows. They had been silent for days, waiting for the coalition to arrive. Their colony had always been a trap, not a weakness. Massive hangar doors the aliens couldn't see from orbit sat hidden under layers of rock. Engines hummed quietly in the dark. Soldiers stood ready, their faces calm, their movements disciplined. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. The alien coalition had grown used to human diplomacy. They expected long negotiations, carefully planned defenses, and rules of engagement. What they didn't understand was that humans had rules for wars they wanted to win. But when their patience ended, so did their rules. The colony's silence was not surrender. It was the sound of a predator breathing in the dark. In the command room at the bottom of the colony, a human commander stood before a large screen, hands clasped behind his back. Around him, officers worked in silence, checking systems, monitoring the enemy's movements. A single red line on the screen flashed once, then turned solid. The commander gave no speech. He didn't need to. Everyone there knew what was coming. For years humanity had played by the galaxy's rules. But tonight it would play by its own. Above the surface, the coalition ships began their advance. Huge carriers and warships moved closer, preparing to begin their bombardment. The alien admirals spoke in confident tones, already imagining their victory. But their sensors continued to report strange fluctuations underground. They thought it was mining tunnels. They thought it was power failures. They didn't realize it was a fleet waking up. A single fighter ship appeared on their sensors, one small, unarmed vessel flying slowly out of the colony. It didn't fire, it didn't run. It just drifted toward the blockade. Alien targeting systems locked onto it immediately, expecting a trick. The admirals ordered it destroyed. A beam of light hit the small ship, shattering it to dust. The coalition ships cheered for a moment, a laugh of false victory. But that ship had never been meant to fight. It had been meant to test their reaction time. The humans now knew how fast their enemies could aim. And then the stars blinked. Around the edges of the solar system, deep in the black where no sensors had looked, hidden Terran ships powered up their drives. No flashy signatures. No warning. Dozens of black hulls slid out of the void like ghosts returning home. These weren't the ships the galaxy had seen before. These were older, heavier, stronger, built for war humanity swore it would never fight again. The coalition didn't even see them until it was too late. One moment the sky was empty, the next it was full of human warships. Inside the alien flagship, alarms screamed. Officers shouted in panic, their confident tone finally breaking. One admiral demanded to know where the human fleet came from. Another ordered all guns ready. But the humans didn't fire. Not yet. They waited, letting the enemy panic. Letting the fear grow like fire in a dry field. The silence pressed down on the aliens like a weight. The human commander stood on the bridge of the lead warship, watching as his fleet surrounded the enemy from the shadows. He had spent years pretending weakness, letting the galaxy believe humanity was tame. But the truth was simple: humans never forget how to fight. They only choose when to start. The coalition fleet didn't understand yet, but the coded message it begins wasn't a threat. It was a countdown. The humans had set the trap long before the first alien ship arrived. Now the jaws were closing. As the night stretched on, the silence of Tesser's reach became something living, something dangerous. Even the bravest alien captains felt it in their bones. A quiet, steady pressure that told them something they couldn't put into words. The humans weren't losing. They weren't retreating. They were waiting. And when Deathworlders waited, the galaxy should have run. The enemy didn't know it yet, but the moment they surrounded the colony, their fate had been sealed. The darkness around Tesser's reach was no longer empty. It was watching. It was listening. And soon, it would strike in the heart of the Galactic Council. Far away from the frozen world of Tesser's reach, the chamber was alive with the sound of overconfidence. The great hall floated above a blue star, its marble-white pillars glowing with soft light, its walls lined with gold and banners from every empire in the coalition. Representatives of dozens of alien races filled the circular room, laughing, drinking, and whispering about the easy victory to come. They had trapped a human colony. They believed it was the beginning of the end for humanity's defiance. No one there questioned the plan. No one there imagined they could lose. For years they had seen humans as strong but limited, warriors bound by rules, a predictable force that could be cornered with enough numbers. They thought they finally had them in a cage. The High Chancellor of the Coalition, a tall creature with scaled armor and eyes like polished stone, stood at the center of the chamber. His voice carried across the hall with the kind of arrogance only an empire at its peak could have. He raised a glass of shimmering blue liquid and declared to the room that this battle would be the beginning of humanity's surrender. His words drew cheers and proud roars. He spoke of how humans were dangerous but soft, how they clung to honor, how they would never unleash their full potential because they were too tied to their own sense of morality. They will bow, he said, because they do not know how to do otherwise. The entire room believed him. But not everyone was laughing. In the corner of the chamber, an old admiral sat in silence. He had fought against Deathworlders during the early border wars, back when humanity first entered the galactic stage. He remembered how the humans fought, not like soldiers following rules, but like predators studying their prey. He remembered battles where their ships moved without warning, where their soldiers didn't hesitate to do what others thought unthinkable. He didn't drink. He didn't smile. He just stared at the floating hologram of Tesser's Reach. The silence of that colony wasn't weakness. It was strategy, and he knew it. Across the chamber, a junior officer rushed toward the council platform with a pale face. He carried a data slate, his steps uneven. The chancellor looked annoyed, as if the interruption was beneath him. The officer stammered out a report. Scouting fleets had gone missing, one after another with no trace. The chancellor waved his hand, dismissing it as noise. "Small sacrifices," he said with a grin. "Their little tricks will not save them." The room laughed again, a chorus of pride masking the first cracks of fear that tried to surface. But the old admiral's jaw tightened. He knew those weren't tricks. Humans didn't waste lives like that. If scouts were disappearing, it was because the humans wanted them to. The council screens flashed with live tactical maps from the fleet above Tesser's Reach. The coalition's warships surrounded the planet like a perfect iron ring. Everything looked stable, controlled. Yet the officers at the front lines had already begun sending quiet reports of something strange. Unreadable signals, disappearing patrols, sudden system malfunctions. The council ignored it. They believed the humans were too few, too cornered to fight back. They thought the silence on the surface meant surrender. They had no idea what kind of storm was already breathing beneath the ice. A senator with 3 glowing eyes stood up and began making a speech about the weakness of human colonies. He talked about how humans built quickly but without true strength, how they would never stand against the combined might of the coalition. He raised his hands and said, "Tonight, we show the galaxy what happens to those who dare defy us." The hall cheered like a pack of predators convinced the hunt was already over. Their arrogance was so thick, it felt like smoke filling the air. The old admiral finally spoke, his voice cutting through the noise. "You are celebrating too early," he said. The room went quiet for a moment, surprised by his tone. Humans don't give up their ground. If the colony is silent, it's not because they are defeated. It's because they are preparing. The chancellor let out a loud, mocking laugh, dismissing him as a relic of past wars. "The humans are loud when they are dangerous," the chancellor said. "This silence means fear." The old admiral shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "It means they're done playing fair." The council ignored him. Pride is a heavy thing, it blinds even the sharpest eyes. They started finalizing their announcement to the galaxy. The chancellor ordered every network to prepare for a victory broadcast. He wanted the entire galaxy to see humanity humbled. Messages were already being written, declaring the fall of Tesser's Reach before the first shot was even fired. They wanted to humiliate the Deathworlders, not just defeat them. They didn't know that in doing so, they were writing their own epitaph. While the council celebrated, something else was happening at the edges of the galactic network. Strange data fragments began appearing in the coalition's communication systems. At first, they thought it was interference. Then they realized the pattern wasn't random. Coordinated. In every language, on every encrypted line, a single human message had quietly slipped through. "It begins." The council's technicians tried to trace it, but there was no origin point. The message came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The chancellor slammed his fist on the table, ordering the signal blocked. Couldn't be. The humans were surrounded. There was no way they could be reaching into the core of the coalition's networks. But the message kept appearing like a whisper crawling through their systems, repeating over and over again. "It begins." The council chamber no longer sounded as confident. Some of the younger senators started exchanging uneasy glances. Generals looked at their data screens with growing discomfort. A few of them even asked if they should strengthen defenses or pull back a few fleets. But the chancellor refused. He declared that humans were bluffing, that their tricks were meaningless. Our fleets outnumber them 50-1, he barked. Their silence means they are afraid. And the council forced themselves to believe him, because the alternative, that the Deathworlders had a plan, was something they were not ready to face. In the shadows of the chamber, the old admiral turned away from the celebration. He didn't need more proof. He had seen this before. When humanity stops talking, it doesn't mean they're broken. It means they're preparing to break something else. And this time, they weren't facing one human fleet or one human world. They were facing something far older, far darker. The true strength that humanity had kept hidden behind its rules. The old admiral whispered to himself words no one else wanted to hear. "They're not cornered," he said softly. "We are." Back on Tesser's Reach, the coalition fleets tightened their circle, blind to the storm below. But far away, at the very center of power, their leaders were already making their greatest mistake, not fearing silence. A silence that was about to crush them. On the cold, dark edge of Tesser's Reach, the alien coalition fleet hung in orbit like a swarm of steel predators circling their prey. Their ships floated in perfect formation, engines glowing faintly in the night as their commanders waited for the order to strike. From their bridges, the human colony below looked quiet, small, fragile. It was everything they had expected, except for one thing. There was no resistance, no defense grid, no transmissions, nothing. Just that single message sent earlier across every frequency in the sector. "It begins." That silence was beginning to stretch too long, too steady, too controlled, and the longer it went on, the more it crawled into the bones of even the most confident alien commanders. The patrols that had been sent down earlier had vanished completely. Not a single signal, not a single flare, no wreckage, just silence. Some of the alien captains tried to laugh it off, calling it a technical fault, maybe a trap that could be crushed. But their voices didn't sound as strong as before. Even their scanners were beginning to behave strangely. Navigation data kept shifting by fractions of a degree, as if space itself was bending around something that wasn't supposed to be there. Energy readings fluctuated in patterns no one recognized. The engineers checked for faults. There were none. On the flagship, Admiral Shurak, a four-eyed reptilian with a scar carved deep across his jaw, stood stiff as his officers reported one confusing update after another. He was old, a soldier of too many wars, and he'd seen many enemies break before the coalition's power. But this wasn't what breaking looked like. This wasn't panic or surrender. This was quiet, and quiet from humans was never good. He leaned over the holomap, staring at the blank space around the colony. He didn't know why, but he felt like he was being watched. More patrols were sent out. Larger groups this time, armed, ready to fight. And one by one they disappeared too. The moment they crossed into the upper atmosphere, their signals faded like they'd fallen into a black ocean. The communications officers called it interference. The science teams said it was an unknown energy field. But in their eyes, buried behind trained calm, was fear. Whole wings of ships don't just vanish into thin air. Something was happening down there, something that none of their technology could see. The younger captains grew restless, whispering on encrypted lines. Some demanded to strike now, to bomb the colony into ash before whatever was down there moved again. Others said they should pull back and regroup. But the high command aboard the flagship refused to look weak. They had brought an entire fleet to crush a single human colony. They couldn't retreat now, not when the whole galaxy was watching. The coalition needed to win. And more than that, they needed to humiliate the Deathworlders. So they waited, tightening their circle around the planet, thinking the humans were trapped. They didn't realize the trap had already closed. Around them, down on the surface, in tunnels carved deep into the frozen crust, the humans watched everything through silent command screens. Every alien patrol, every fleet formation, every movement was already mapped. Long before the coalition arrived, the colony had been prepared not as a home, but as a weapon. Humans had learned one thing over centuries of war. The most dangerous predator is the one that lets you believe you're winning. In a dark room, the human commander stood in front of a massive display. The alien fleet's positions were blinking in red. His voice was calm, low, and steady as he gave simple orders to the officers around him. No shouting, no drama, just cold precision. This was not war to them. This was math. Above, the alien fleet tried to scan deeper into the tunnels. But every time they pushed their scanners, they got static back like the planet itself was swallowing their signals. One science officer on the flagship swore she saw a flash of movement beneath the ice. Something massive, something metallic, but it vanished before she could lock onto it. She repeated the scan. Nothing. The data disappeared like it had never existed. Hours passed, and the tension inside the fleet kept tightening like a wire ready to snap. Then, without warning, the colony's surface lights flickered on. Not the normal colony lights, but sharp crimson lines cutting through the snow and ice like scars glowing against the night. First, the aliens thought it was a malfunction, but the lines weren't random. They were patterns. Massive geometric shapes spreading across the colony like ancient runes. The sensors began picking up power surges far beyond anything a small settlement could generate. That was the moment some of the captains stopped laughing. Panic whispers rippled through the lower decks of the coalition fleet. Even the soldiers began to feel it. The air inside the ships was thick and heavy, the kind of quiet that always came before disaster. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath. A captain from one of the outer perimeter ships reported faint echoes on their long-range sensors. They thought it was noise, but it wasn't noise. It was movement. Multiple signals approaching from the black edges of the system. Their speed was too fast. Their signature was too faint. Their computers couldn't lock onto it. And then one of the outer ships went dark. No explosion. No distress signal. Just darkness. Then another. And another. Like stars being swallowed one by one. The admiral screamed for a perimeter scan, but the results came back blank. There was nothing there. Nothing the coalition could see. But the humans were already there. Waiting. On the flagship, Admiral Shurak barked orders, his comm cracking at last. "Find them," he roared. "Where are they?" His officers moved frantically, but the holomap showed only empty space. The humans weren't just hiding. They were ghosts, sliding between the edges of their sensor range like predators in tall grass. The admiral's second-in-command turned to him, his voice low and shaking. "Sir, they're inside our perimeter." The laughter that had once filled the council chamber light years away was gone now. What filled the alien ships was the sound of alarms, static, and the quiet breathing of soldiers who suddenly realized they weren't hunting anymore. They were being hunted. Every captain on that battlefield could feel it in their bones now. The humans hadn't been silent because they were afraid. They'd been silent because they were preparing to strike. The stars above Tesser's reach flickered as more human ships slipped out of the void like black blades cutting through fabric. No grand speeches. No threats. Just movement swift, precise, deadly. The coalition still thought they were surrounding the colony. But in truth, they were surrounded. Their noose had turned into their cage. And as the first human warship locked its targeting systems, the cold voice of the human commander finally broke the silence, carried on a frequency the aliens couldn't block. "Now," he said simply. One word. No more warnings. The storm was about to begin. The blackness around Tesser's reach was no longer empty. It moved. It breathed. It waited. The alien coalition fleet, still wrapped in the illusion of control, didn't realize that their perfect circle of warships had already been broken from the inside. Far beneath the frozen surface of the colony, humanity's most dangerous weapon stirred from its long, patient sleep. Giant armored blast doors groaned deep underground, opening like the jaws of some buried beast. One by one, enormous hangars lit up with cold white light. For years, the aliens had believed this colony was a soft target, a mining settlement with little to no strategic value. What they didn't know was that it was built on top of a hidden military vault, a remnant of the old Terran defense grid, forged in the fires of forgotten wars. This was not a colony. This was a loaded gun. Inside the subterranean complex, the Terran silent fleet came alive. Rows of black warships, long and sleek like knives, powered up in perfect silence. No engines roared. No sirens wailed. The launch sequence was designed to make no noise, to give no warning. Reactor cores warmed like the beating of a single massive heart beneath the ground. Soldiers moved with trained precision, no shouts, no hesitation. They had waited for this moment for months, maybe years, knowing it would come. The alien coalition thought they had cornered humanity. In reality, they had walked into its hunting ground. On the bridge of the lead ship, the human admiral stood straight as the walls around him vibrated with power. He watched the orbital feed projected across the entire forward display. Dozens of alien ships, their engines glowing weakly, unaware of what was about to crawl out of the ice beneath their feet. "Initiate silent launch," he said, his voice calm, flat, almost too quiet for the chaos that was about to follow. Across the entire fleet, the ground shuddered as launch tubes opened and thick columns of steel rose through the frozen surface like fangs tearing through flesh. The first black hull emerged under the cover of the night sky, reflecting nothing, a ghost among the stars. In orbit, alien scanners were flooded with interference. Operators tried recalibrating, thinking it was a solar flare, a glitch, something explainable. But then one of the smaller ships picked up a faint silhouette just beneath the surface of the planet. Then another, and another. A cold whisper spread across the fleet's comm channels as captains realized what they were seeing. It wasn't static. It wasn't broken data. It was movement, massive movement. And it was all coming from beneath the colony. The alien admiral demanded a firing solution. Target the underground structures, bombard the surface before anything could come out. But before the order could reach the outer batteries, the ground cracked open like splitting bone, and the first wave of Terran warships launched into the sky. They didn't ascend with the clumsy burn of most ships. They cut through the air in perfect synchronization, engines dark and silent, only the shimmer of displaced air trailing behind them. One moment the surface was still. The next it was filled with shadows. The alien fleet immediately opened fire, their beams cutting through the cold vacuum like a storm. But the human ships didn't break. They didn't even flinch. Advanced jamming systems blinded the coalition's targeting systems, bending every calculation by just enough to make their shots miss. The Terran fleet spread out like a net, silent and precise, surrounding their attackers from below. This was not improvisation. This was a plan that had been waiting to happen the moment the first alien ship entered orbit. The human admiral watched as his ships reached formation. "Lock primary targets," he ordered. Across the Terran fleet, targeting arrays came online without a single warning ping. For the first time, the aliens felt something they weren't used to feeling in battle, a complete lack of control. Their screens went dark. Their long-range scanners froze. Their defense grids flickered like dying candles. Someone shouted that their weapons weren't locking. Someone else screamed that the humans were inside their fire range without being detected. The alien admiral barked orders, but no one could answer fast enough. The silent fleet fired. No blazing light, no grand spectacle, just black lances of kinetic slugs and invisible railgun fire ripping through alien hulls like paper. Ships that had stood for decades as symbols of power were torn open in seconds. The first line of defense was gone before it even had the chance to respond. Wreckage scattered into the void like glowing embers drifting through night. Entire crews never even saw what killed them. Panic spread through the coalition ranks like wildfire. Some captains tried to hold formation, others turned their ships to run. But running was impossible. Every angle they turned, more Terran ships were already there. It wasn't just an attack. It was a hunt. The humans had spent years studying their tactics, their formation discipline, their sensor weaknesses. Every move the aliens made was already anticipated. Every countermeasure already dismantled before it could begin. On the command bridge of the alien flagship, alarms screamed from every wall. The Admiral's control board was flooded with red alerts, every defense measure failing one after another. "How many ships are there?" someone shouted. No one could answer. Their scanners still showed nothing but black. The only proof of the Terran fleet's existence was the growing field of wreckage around them. Meanwhile, in the human command center, the Admiral gave no speeches. There was no need for them. The entire fleet moved like a single living organism. This was the moment humanity stopped pretending to be predictable. This was the moment they stopped holding back. The Silent Fleet had been hidden beneath the colony for decades for exactly this scenario. The aliens thought they had surrounded humanity, but in truth, they had walked straight into the jaws of something ancient and patient. One by one, coalition cruisers tried to break away from orbit to retreat, but their engines were disabled before they could even spin up their FTL drives. Railgun rounds the size of buildings punched clean through their hulls. Their cries for reinforcements were eaten by the void. They were isolated, alone, and the humans had no intention of letting anyone escape. The alien admiral stared at the growing wall of darkness closing around his fleet and finally understood what that simple human transmission meant. "It begins" wasn't a threat. It was a promise. It was humanity giving them one last moment to feel safe before the storm came. Above the frozen world of Tesser's reach, the galaxy's predators finally realized they were prey. And as the black Terran warships filled the sky, moving with the cold precision of a species born on a death world, every commander who had once laughed at humanity understood why the older species still spoke their name with fear. The hunt had begun, and there was no way out. The first shots had already burned through the darkness of orbit, but what came next was not a battle. It was an execution. The alien coalition fleet, once confident and loud, was now tangled in the black jaws of something they couldn't understand. The Terran Silent Fleet moved like shadows carved out of space itself. They did not rush. They did not roar. They advanced with the calm precision of predators who knew the outcome before the hunt began. In the command centers of the alien ships, officers screamed reports into broken comms, but there was no answer from their admirals anymore. Whole lines of communication were cut off, shredded like paper before they could even stabilize. Humanity's trap was not just firepower. It was control, and the coalition no longer had any. A massive alien dreadnought turned its cannons toward the planet below, desperate to bombard the colony and burn away whatever force was rising from it. Its targeting systems locked on for half a second, just long enough for hope to flicker, then went black. Before the gunners even understood what had happened, a single Terran railgun slug ripped through its hull like a hammer through glass. The dreadnought split in two without a sound, flames blooming into the void like dying suns. Hundreds of lives were gone in a flash, and the rest of the fleet watched in frozen terror as the largest warship they had brought fell apart like it was made of paper. The coalition admirals shouted to regroup, to form firing lines, to push their superior numbers into a wall of resistance. But no matter where they turned, the Terrans were already there. Black ships slid between their formations like blades, cutting them apart silently and efficiently. Every time the coalition moved to attack one human vessel, 3 more appeared behind them. Their sensors were blind. Their navigation failed. Their missiles detonated in the wrong direction. It was like fighting the darkness itself. The galaxy had always mocked humans for their recklessness, but what they faced here wasn't recklessness. It was something colder, older, more dangerous, strategy sharpened over centuries. A coalition cruiser, its captain breathing hard, tried to flee the battlefield. Its engines flared bright as it spun to escape the gravity well of the planet. But just as it broke formation, a single Terran fighter glided into view. A ship so small, so fast, that the cruiser's targeting systems couldn't lock on in time. A bright flash, a perfect hit, and the cruiser's engines went dead. It drifted helplessly into the void like a broken toy. Before it could even send out a distress signal, another Terran ship ended it in one clean shot. There were no long duels, no drawn-out engagements. The humans didn't waste ammunition. They killed with precision. Panic ripped through the coalition ranks like a spreading crack in glass. Captains shouted over each other, begging for orders, screaming for reinforcements that weren't coming. The admiral on the flagship slammed his fist against the control console, his voice hoarse as he demanded answers. "How are they doing this?" he barked. No one could answer him. All their technology, their scanners, their defenses, everything that had made them so sure of victory was useless. The Terrans had built their war not on what could be seen, but on what could not. Meanwhile, in the black heart of the Silent Fleet, the Terran admiral stood still, hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the tactical display. The enemy fleet was collapsing faster than he had predicted. His officers moved quietly, their voices steady, their focus absolute. There was no cheering, no celebration, only the steady rhythm of trained killers doing what they had waited to do for far too long. Humanity had fought the galaxy on its terms for decades, but tonight they were fighting on their own. The alien flagship tried to send a last desperate order to retreat. They thought if they scattered, some might survive. But the humans had already predicted that. The moment the first ships broke away from the main fleet, they found the exit points blocked by Terran interceptors waiting in the dark. Railgun slugs sliced through them like knives through cloth. Escape was not an option. The cage had closed the moment they arrived. The alien admiral stared at the growing field of debris around his fleet. Ships that had once been feared symbols of power were now burning wrecks drifting silently. He thought of the council far away, laughing, drinking, calling this an easy victory. They hadn't seen what he was seeing now. The humans were not cornered animals. They were hunters who had spent decades hiding their claws. And the coalition had been foolish enough to give them the perfect chance to use them. Terran dropships began moving toward the largest enemy ships, not to fight, but to disable their command cores. The humans didn't need to destroy everything, they wanted control. Every move they made was deliberate, every strike surgical. The aliens didn't even realize how deep they were already entangled. Their entire armada wasn't being annihilated at random. It was being dismantled piece by piece. A coalition captain screamed through the comms, her voice cracking with panic. "They're everywhere. They're inside the perimeter. They're..." Her voice cut off as her ship vanished in a burst of light. The Terrans didn't reply. They didn't send messages or demands. Only the quiet thrum of their engines and the cold flash of their weapons filled the black. On the human flagship, the admiral gave a single nod to his crew. "Begin the sweep," he said, and the entire Terran fleet shifted formation in a heartbeat. The aliens didn't even have time to breathe. Terran ships moved like a black wave, tearing through the remaining coalition vessels as if they were nothing more than drifting metal. The enemy's numerical advantage collapsed. All that remained was chaos, panic, and silence. The admiral of the coalition fleet fell into his chair as the lights around him flickered. Reports of destroyed ships flooded the bridge until the alerts themselves became meaningless. The enemy wasn't fighting a war anymore. They were surviving the last seconds of a disaster. His hands trembled as he whispered, "This isn't a battle. This is a message." And he was right. The Terrans could have made this loud. They could have crushed the fleet with overwhelming fire. But instead, they did it quietly, cleanly, without giving their enemy even the dignity of a dramatic last stand. This was not just about destroying a fleet. This was about showing the galaxy what happened when humanity stopped holding back. The last ships fell one by one. Fires bloomed in orbit like dying stars. The void around Tesser's reach grew calm again, as if nothing had ever happened. The Terran fleet hovered silently, black shapes against a starless sky, their engines pulsing like a heartbeat that now belonged to them alone. The alien flagship drifted powerless, surrounded by Terran warships. The coalition's greatest force had been erased in less than an hour. Inside the command center of the Terran flagship, the admiral stood motionless. His voice was calm as ever when he finally spoke. "Transmit the signal," he ordered. No one asked what signal. They already knew. Across the stars, a simple message began to move. Calm, cold, final. "We are done playing fair." And somewhere deep in the galaxy, in distant council chambers where arrogant voices once laughed at humanity, the sound of that message was enough to silence entire rooms. Tonight wasn't just the fall of a fleet. It was the night the galaxy learned what Deathworlders truly were. Across the galaxy, news of the fleet's destruction spread like a wildfire no one could control. In the great halls of the Galactic Council, the laughter that had once filled the air was gone. The senators, generals, and ambassadors who had declared this war with such pride now stared at the glowing red icons on their screens. One after another, the coalition's fleets had gone dark. No return signals, no survivors, no heroic last messages, just silence. It was the same kind of silence that had started everything. A silence that now belonged entirely to humanity. For centuries, the galaxy had mocked the Deathworlders for fighting with restraint, for following rules. But in one night, they had learned what happens when those rules are gone. The High Chancellor of the Coalition sat frozen at the head of the council table, his claws digging into the polished metal surface. Reports flooded in from every listening post. The Terran Silent Fleet had not only crushed the invasion at Tesser's Reach, it had done it so fast that the news reached the council before most of the Admiral's death confirmations. No distress signals had escaped, no heroic stands, no second chances. An entire armada, the most powerful fleet the Coalition had ever assembled, had been dismantled in less than an hour. The Chancellor tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The great empire they had built on arrogance was starting to shake. The senators turned on each other, shouting over the hum of the central holomap. Some screamed for immediate retaliation, others demanded surrender before the humans reached their worlds. One general slammed his fist on the table, roaring that they should throw every ship they had at humanity before it was too late. Another whispered that it was already too late. All of them had built their power on the same belief, that humans were dangerous but controllable. That illusion was dead now. The old admiral who had warned them before sat in the shadows, his hands clenched, his voice low. "They didn't just beat us," he said, his words cutting through the chaos. "They erased us. They knew every move before we made it. That wasn't war. That was precision. That was preparation. We didn't corner them. They cornered us." The room fell quiet at his voice, because everyone knew he was right. The humans hadn't just won a fight. They had dismantled the largest military machine in the galaxy without breaking a sweat. Meanwhile, on the outer borders of Coalition space, sensor stations began to pick up something strange. Massive energy readings, unidentified movements, entire star systems blinking in and out of the network. Patrol fleets tried to get close, but their transmissions were lost in seconds. What they didn't know yet was that humanity's silent fleet wasn't staying hidden anymore. It was moving, and when Deathworlders moved, no one in the galaxy was safe. Back at the council, panic grew like a living thing. One senator shouted that they should open diplomatic channels, send messages begging for peace. Another hissed that it wouldn't matter, that the humans weren't talking anymore. They were done playing fair. The Chancellor tried to call the admirals, but there were no admirals left to call. Their command structure was shattered. The war was over before it had even truly begun. In the dark void outside the galactic core, Terran warships moved in formation, their black hulls swallowing the light of nearby stars. They didn't need to broadcast their arrival. Every empire could feel it. Every listening post that picked up even the faintest trace of their engines fell silent within minutes. Across hundreds of alien worlds, civilians stared at the night sky, watching unfamiliar shadows drift past their moons. Humanity didn't need to speak to be heard anymore. Its silence had become louder than the Coalition's entire fleet. Inside the Terran flagship, the human admiral stood with both hands resting on the railing, looking out at the endless starfield. He wasn't smiling. This wasn't a celebration. This was inevitability. They had given the galaxy chance after chance to leave them alone, to keep the peace. But every time, the aliens had mistaken mercy for weakness. Now the mask was off. "No more warnings," he said quietly to his officers. "No more rules. We finished this." Back in the council chamber, desperate plans began to fall apart before they could even take shape. The senators shouted for planetary shields to be raised, for defenses to be prepared. But the old admiral shook his head again. "You don't understand," he rasped. "They're already here." He pulled up the sensor feed from the inner systems. Hundreds of Terran signatures, black, silent, already surrounding their core worlds, were moving like a tidal wave closing in. The council realized too late that the battle at Tesser's Reach hadn't been their final stand. It had only been the beginning of humanity's response. The first Terran broadcast cut through every defense channel at once. Every screen in the chamber flickered black, then displayed a single image. A human standing on the bridge of a warship, back straight, face calm, voice low. "We asked for peace," the admiral said. "You came for war. You thought we were weak. You thought we were predictable. You thought wrong." The sound of his voice rolled through the chamber like thunder. "You will remember this day. All of you." The chancellor tried to stand tall, but his knees shook as the image faded. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be prey. All across coalition space, fleets were already falling apart. Defenses crumbled. Outposts went silent. The Terran Silent Fleet was not coming. It had already arrived. On the bridge of the Terran flagship, orders were given with quiet precision. Human ships advanced toward the core worlds, their formation perfect, their presence like the weight of an ancient storm. They didn't need to shout their intentions. The galaxy already knew. The humans were no longer holding back. And this time, they weren't coming to defend, they were coming to end the war. The High Chancellor stared at the map one last time, watching the black swarm of Terran ships closing in. His voice broke as he whispered, "Gods help us." They were never the ones trapped. But no one answered. The chamber was silent, heavy and cold. Far above their world, human warships cut through space like blades, ready to finish what had begun with 3 simple words. It begins. And for the first time in history, the galaxy truly understood why they called them Deathworlders. The Terran fleet descended upon the core of the coalition like the night sky itself had come alive. Black ships stretched across the stars, countless and silent, their hulls swallowing every trace of light. The once proud capital system, surrounded by rings of golden defense platforms and massive orbital fortresses, had never imagined a day when an enemy could reach its gates without warning. For centuries, this system had been untouchable. It was the center of their empire, their heart, their pride. But pride meant nothing now. The defenses that had once made them feel invincible were about to become monuments to their own arrogance. The sky above their capital world was no longer theirs. It belonged to humanity. The Terran fleet did not announce its arrival. There were no declarations, no speeches, no demands. Only the slow, steady emergence of black warships from the void. Their engines made no sound, but their presence carried a weight that pressed down on everything beneath it. Defense crews scrambled in panic, alarms wailed across orbital stations, and soldiers who had never seen real combat rushed into position with shaking hands. The High Chancellor was rushed to the central command tower, his face pale, his steps unsteady. The capital had always been the one place that never needed to worry about war. Now war stood above it, silent and watching. In the council chamber, the senators and generals screamed at each other like cornered animals. Orders collided with fear. Logic collapsed under the weight of what hung above their heads. Some demanded to negotiate, some demanded to fight, and some simply stared at the screens in quiet terror. The black swarm of Terran ships grew thicker with every passing second, their formations like a carefully drawn blade surrounding a helpless throat. No matter what the council decided, it was already over. The humans had planned every step before the first alien fleet even reached Tesser's reach. This was not war, it was checkmate. From orbit, the coalition's defense platforms opened fire. Hundreds of beams of pure energy shot into the void, blazing through the darkness in a desperate attempt to push humanity back. But the Terran fleet was not a wall, it was a current. Their ships moved through the fire like water slipping between fingers, twisting, vanishing, reappearing where the enemy didn't expect. Their armor absorbed what little energy managed to reach them. Their counters came not in a flood, but in a storm of precision. One by one, the defense platforms died without even realizing they were being targeted. Their explosions painted the sky gold for a heartbeat, then faded into nothing. Panic spread through the capital like poison in the veins. The population looked up from the streets and towers, watching the black shapes above their atmosphere. There was no broadcast, no announcement, just silence. That silence was worse than any threat, because everyone knew, if humanity wanted them dead, it wouldn't take hours, it wouldn't even take minutes. It would be over before their leaders could finish a single order. On the bridge of the Terran flagship, the admiral stood with the calm of a man who had already won long before stepping into the room. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The galaxy had mocked humanity, had underestimated it for too long. They had cornered what they thought was a beast, but what they had actually found was a hunter. And now the hunter had come to collect its due. "Lock final positions," the admiral said softly, his voice steady like a blade against stone. Around him, Terran officers moved with quiet precision, not a hint of panic or hesitation. To them, this was not conquest. It was inevitability. Back on the surface, the High Chancellor tried to speak to his people through the planetary broadcast network. His voice cracked as he looked up at the swarm of black ships filling the sky. We will not surrender," he said, but even he didn't believe it. His words were weak, hollow, drowned out by the quiet dread spreading through every soul who heard them. For centuries, they had believed humanity was dangerous but contained, a lion behind a fence. Now they saw the truth. The fence had never been for the lion. It had been for them. The Terran admiral gave the signal. The fleet moved like a single living being. Orbital defenses crumbled in minutes. Coalition battle stations were erased with the precision of a scalpel. Every fleet that dared to rise from the surface was met with the same cold, merciless strike. In the control towers, officers screamed for reinforcements, for orders, for a miracle. None came. Every channel they tried was already jammed. Every signal was already owned. Humanity didn't just control the battlefield. Humanity was the battlefield now. The Council tried one last desperate act. They activated the planetary defense grid, a system they believed could withstand anything in the galaxy. Thousands of cannons and satellites powered up, drawing energy from deep beneath the capital. For a brief moment, their skies shone bright with power. The High Chancellor whispered, "They can't survive this," convincing himself more than anyone else. But the Terrans didn't flinch. Their ships adjusted formation, absorbed the storm, and returned it with surgical cruelty. Within minutes, the mighty planetary defense grid, the pride of their empire, was nothing but burning wreckage raining down on the capital below. The people saw their final shield burn away and fell silent. There were no more illusions left to cling to. No one could lie to them anymore. The Deathworlders weren't coming to negotiate. They weren't bluffing. This was the final chapter of a story that had begun the moment the Coalition chose war over peace. Humanity was not just winning. Humanity was reminding the galaxy what it was capable of when pushed too far. Then came the broadcast. Every screen in every building, every ship, every tower across the entire system flickered black, then came to life with the face of a single human. The Admiral stood in his dark uniform, hands behind his back, voice calm and quiet, carrying more weight than an entire army. "We offered peace," he said, each word clear and sharp. "You came for war. You thought we were weak. You thought we were predictable. But you forgot one thing. Deathworlders don't forgive." The Chancellor sank into his chair as the words echoed across the world. His empire, the greatest in the galaxy, had fallen without a single Terran losing their voice to rage. The fleet outside stopped firing. They didn't need to keep destroying. They had already taken everything. Surrender was no longer a choice. It was reality. On the bridge of the Terran flagship, the Admiral watched as the capital's defenses went dark one by one. His crew stood in silence, not celebrating, not boasting, because for them this wasn't glory. It was justice. "Transmit the final order," the Admiral said quietly. "Secure everything." Terran dropships streaked through the sky like black arrows. No one fired back. The soldiers on the ground had already thrown down their weapons. Entire battalions surrendered before the first boots touched the surface. The once mighty capital of the Coalition fell in silence, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. From that day forward, the galaxy remembered this night, the night the Deathworlders unleashed their true power. They did not roar. They did not scream. They simply came, struck, and left the galaxy to understand what they truly were. A legend was born, not from fire and noise, but from cold, unstoppable silence. A silence the galaxy would never forget.